A man is crawling through a pipe. Not a large pipe, a cable duct, barely wide enough for his shoulders, cut into the concrete wall of a building on the edge of a Norwegian cliff. Outside, German guards are walking their patrol route. He is 23 years old. In his satchel, 4.5 kilograms of plastic explosive, a set of detonators, and fuses cut to 30 seconds. In his pocket, a cyanide capsule. He crawls forward. The duct is cold. The concrete presses on his back. Somewhere above him, a guard walks across the floor. He keeps moving. So imagine spending years trying to build the most advanced facility on Earth, only to spend the rest of the war trying to destroy it. Or picture being the British military, sending 41 of your best guys into a mission that if they get caught, they get executed. And then there's the guy crawling through that pipe you just saw. He didn't actually know what he was trying to stop. This is the story of the mission to deny Nazi Germany the nuclear bomb. And the crazy part is, it was carried out by people who had no idea what they were actually doing. Imagine being handed the mission. Your target is a factory in Norway. You're told it produces something called heavy water, but nobody actually explains to you what that means. You don't ask, you train, you prepare, you get on that plane. But here's what you would have been fighting for if they told you. Heavy water looks exactly like regular water. You could pour yourself a glass right now, drink it, and notice nothing. But inside a nuclear reactor, it's the little difference between a reaction and no reaction at all. Without it, the German bomb doesn't work. At the time, there was only one plant in the entire world capable of producing enough heavy water for an atom bomb. A factory built on the side of a cliff in Norway. And it was designed by one man sitting in London, now trying to destroy it. His name was Leif Tronstad. Funny enough, he was once called the worst student ever admitted into the chemical engineering program, but he turned out to be their most promising graduate. By his mid-30s, he had actually invented a process for producing heavy water, using the Norwegian hydroelectric plant. It was the first setup anywhere in the world of its kind. He built the Vemork plant himself, and he was proud of it. Then Germany invaded Norway in 1940. Tronstad fought, but Norway lost. So he went back to teaching in university. But in secret, he was running an intelligence network inside the same plant the Germans now occupied. His old colleagues were still working under the Germans, and they started feeding him information. Basically, German interest in heavy water was going through the roof, and Tronstad knew exactly what that meant. So he forwarded everything to London. Then, in September 1941, the Gestapo came for him. A colleague managed to give him a warning just in time. He had to leave his wife and kids behind. But he arrived in London with one piece of intel that would change the war forever. The Germans were expanding production at Vemork at a rate the world had never seen. Tronstad built the Vemork plant. He knew exactly what this meant. Now, on the other side of Norway, you've got this 20-year-old kid named Joachim Ronberg. He was working for a fish export company the time the Germans invaded. He didn't stick around. Within a few weeks, him and a couple mates found a fishing boat and sailed to Scotland through the North Sea. When he landed in Scotland, he reported back to the Norwegian government in exile, and they put him in the Norwegian Independent Company. They teach him how to use explosives, operate radios, and how to kill people quietly. He was so good at it that by 1942, they promoted him to training instructor. Then, early the next year, he gets a message from London. He's been picked to lead an op back in Norway. They don't tell him the target, and they definitely don't tell him why it matters. He said later that they had never mentioned nuclear weapons. They just said heavy water. He had no idea what it was used for, but he said yes anyway. But before Ronberg's team went in, there was another attempt. November 1942. 41 British Royal Engineers strapped onto 2 gliders towed by Halifax bombers. Their plan was to land, link up with a Norwegian team on the ground, and sabotage the Vemork plant. These 4 Norwegians had been there for a month, in the snow, eating reindeer and melting snow for water, just waiting for the British to arrive. Both gliders crashed on impact. Some died in the crash, but the survivors were scattered on a mountain, and German patrols found them. Hitler actually had a standing order at this time. Any Allied commando captured, whether armed or unarmed, trying to surrender or not, was to be shot immediately without trial. So the Germans interrogated the soldiers and then shot them, 41 of them. In the wreckage, the Germans found a map with the Vemork plant circled in red. So now they knew. They doubled the garrison overnight. They put minefields, electrified fences, searchlights, and put a 24-hour guard on the single bridge leading to the plant. And the 4 Norwegians still freezing up on the plateau, they got a message from London telling them to just hold their position. so they held. Back in England, Tronstad actually built a replica of the Vemork plant. Not a drawing, a full mock-up, built on the intelligence he had been gathering from his colleagues still working under the Germans. Ronberg's team practiced in it for weeks in pitch black. They were ready to go ahead, but right before they left, Tronstad brought everybody together and told them one thing. He still couldn't tell them what the heavy water was actually used for, because it was too classified. He just told them that if they pulled this off, it would be ingrained in Norway's history for 100 years. Each of them was then given a cyanide capsule, like a little rubber casing, and if you swallow it, you're dead in 3 seconds. They put them in their pockets, and they got on the plane. February 16th, 1943. 6 guys jump into a massive snowstorm over Norway. They're wearing white camo over their British Army officer uniform, so if they get caught, the Germans will put the blame on the British, not the Norwegian citizens. They all land alive, but they're 45 kilometers away from the 4-man Norwegian team. They find a cabin in the snow and hide out for 5 days. It's minus 20 outside. Whenever the storm breaks for a second, there are German patrol planes. They don't have enough food for 5 extra days, so they're shooting reindeer and melting snow just like the Norwegians. On day 5, it finally clears up, so they ski east across the plateau and actually find the 4 guys from the first mission, the guys who had been there since October, who heard about the executioners on the radio, but they still stayed. They sat down together, they eat, and they figure out exactly how they're going to do this. There are basically 3 ways into the plant. You can come from the mountains above, but that's entirely mined. You can cross the suspension bridge, but it's guarded around the clock. Or you can climb 200 meters straight down into a pitch black gorge, cross a half-frozen river, and scale the sheer cliff face on the other side. The Germans literally thought that the third option was physically impossible. The locals thought it was impossible too. On the night of February 27th, they went into the gorge. It takes them hours to get down. One guy slips on the ice crossing the river, catches a rock, and keeps going. They had heavy packs on their shoulders, rifles, explosives, detonators. They weren't going in light. They get to the top, right by a railway line that leads straight into the compound. There are 2 guards, but just enough space that they can slip through the shadows, so that they split up. The cover team aims their submachine guns at the command posts, waiting for Germans to peek their heads over, ready to buy the demolition team some time if the alarms go off. Ronberg takes 4 guys and they head into the basement. They get to the basement door, and of course, it's locked. But Tronstad knew this. His contacts had told him about a cable duct, this narrow, freezing maintenance tunnel cut right through the foundation of the building, and it was unlocked. Ronberg finds it, and he heads in first. He spends 10 minutes crawling through. His shoulders are scraping against the walls. He can hear the factory floor right above him. Outside, there's the heavily armed garrison that's been alert for months. But he gets to the end of the duct and drops into the basement. There are 18 electrosis cells there, floor to ceiling, just humming there in the dark. Beside them are steel drums filled with months of collected heavy water. It's literally everything the German nuclear program needs, sitting in one room. And then a door opens. A Norwegian plant worker, just an older guy who had worked there for years, walks in. He freezes. He's looking at these guys in camo, with weapons and satchels full of explosives. He asks for his glasses. They'd fallen on the floor, and he just wanted them back. Ronberg lets him pick them up. They move the guy over to a wall and don't hurt him. They strap the charges to all 18 cells, connect the detonators, and cut the fuses to exactly 30 seconds. Ronberg lights them. 30 seconds. The last guy was 24-year-old Frederick Kaiser. He stops at 20 seconds just to look back to make sure the fuses are actually burning. They are. And they run. The charges went off at 12:45 a.m. All 18 cells were completely destroyed. 550 kilograms of heavy water. Months and months of work cracked open and drained right into the floor. The crazy thing is, the Germans heard the explosion, but they just looked at the snow on the mountain and they figured that it was the snow slide setting off one of their mines. So the alarm wasn't even raised right away. By the time they had figured out what happened, all 9 guys were back down into the gorge. They didn't fire a single shot and nobody was killed. The SOE later called it one of the most successful acts of sabotage in the entire war. But the thing was, 3 months later, the Germans had rebuilt the entire facility and started producing again. So in November 1943, the Americans decided to just bomb the place. They sent over 140 B-17 bombers and dropped over 700 bombs onto the place. But the heavy water cells were buried so deep in reinforced concrete they were barely touched. What the bombs did do was kill 22 Norwegian civilians. Tronstad had actually argued against bombing the facility for this exact reason, and he was right. But the bombing spooked the Germans so much, they decided to shut down Vemork and transport all of the remaining heavy water back to Germany. About 15,000 liters in steel drums, getting transported across a lake by a ferry. One of the guys from the original team, when he found out about the transport, got a local group together, went onto the ferry, and sabotaged it again. All 15,000 liters drained into the lake. He knew there were Norwegian civilians on that ferry, people just getting up and going to work on the other side, but he planted the bombs anyway. On February 20th, 1944, the ferry was crossing Lake Tinn. At 10:45 a.m., the charges went off. The ship sank in 4 minutes, 14 civilians died, and 15,000 liters of heavy water sank straight to the bottom. Was the end of the heavy water war. But here's the thing you kind of have to sit with for a second. The atomic bombs that ended the Pacific War were built by the US, but the US only won that war because Germany lost it, and Germany lost it because their nuclear program kept getting setbacks, hitting brick walls, funding issues, scientists arguing, and no reliable supply for the one material they needed for it to work. Now, historians argue about how close Germany was to a bomb. Most think they were a lot further behind than what the Allies worried, but the guys sitting in London and Washington in 1943 didn't know that. From where they were sitting, Germany had figured out fission first. They had the only factory in the world producing the material that you needed for an atom bomb. They had the scientists, and they had the uranium. When those 9 guys climbed out of that gorge and broke into that basement, they were basically placing a bet on everyone that would be born after them. A bet that the post-war world would be shaped by whoever got the bomb first. You and I are sitting here because of how that bet landed, and the guys who placed it didn't even know what they were betting on. After the war, Allied teams went into Germany to see what they could recover out of the German nuclear program. Down in Bavaria, they found a second facility. It was a heavy water plant that had been running in total secret for the last few months of the war. By the time they had found it, it had produced nearly enough heavy water to build an atomic bomb. They had been much closer than anyone had realized. Joachim Ronberg actually made it home and spent his life working as a radio broadcaster. For decades, he'd go around Norwegian schools giving talks, and he always insisted that the mission only succeeded because they got lucky, not because they were special. When he was 95, someone sat down with him and asked him what it had taught him, and he said, "You have to fight for your freedom and fight for peace every day, just to keep it. It's like a glass boat. It's easy to break, and it's easy to lose." He was the last surviving member of the team. He died in 2018 at 99 years old. Thank you, Ronberg. Tronstad spent almost the whole war planning missions that he couldn't go on. In 1944, they finally gave him a field command and dropped him back into Norway, onto the same plateau where Ronberg's guys had hidden. But in March 1945, literally weeks before the Germans surrendered, he got into a shootout with some Norwegian collaborators in a cabin and was shot and killed. He was 41. He never got to see his country free again. Nut Haukelid, the guy who sank the ferry, survived. He wrote about the decision for the rest of his life, and it's pretty clear he never fully reconciled it. He died in 1994. As for the Vemork plant, it was demolished in the 70s, and the basement was just buried under the rubble. But in 2017, archaeologists dug it up and found it completely intact. The cells were gone, but the floor and drains were there. The cable duct Ronberg crawled through is still there. It's a museum now. You can walk right through it. There's a little plaque explaining what happened there in 1943 and what it might have prevented. It doesn't claim those 9 guys definitely stopped Hitler's bomb. History isn't that clean. It just says that 9 men in the pitch black on a freezing mountain decided to try. One last thing though. There's one question historians have never been able to agree on. Werner Heisenberg, the physicist running the German nuclear program, claimed that after the war he had deliberately sabotaged it. He said that he could have built a bomb, but he chose not to. Nobody has been able to prove if that's actually true.